Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a world where freedom sounds close enough to touch, yet slips away like mist above a cold river. You stand on the edge of the English colonies in 1650, where no single rule seems to settle your fate, and where one day can feel almost hopeful before the next turns strangely cruel. What are you, exactly, in a place that refuses to answer clearly? A servant for years, a slave for life, a Christian soul. A commodity with a name half remembered by others and fully carried only by you. The air smells of salt, wet timber, smoke, and churned mud, and every sound seems to carry a warning. A ship rope groans, a gull cries overhead. Somewhere nearby, a hammer strikes wood in a steady rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself drift into a century that has not yet decided how openly cruel it wants to be. Though the answer is already taking shape around you, you wake before sunrise because almost everyone does. The dark still sits low over the settlement, and the cold presses through rough cloth and into your skin. The ground beneath you is damp, and the smell of packed earth rises with the faint sweetness of cut wood and old ash. A rooster starts somewhere in the distance. Dogs stir. Someone coughs behind a thin wall. In this hour, before the colony fully wakes, the world feels uncertain in a quiet way, as though it has not yet chosen its mood. You are in Virginia, or perhaps Maryland, or one of the nearby English places clinging to the Atlantic edge. The land is still being forced into shape by axes, fences, ditches, and stubborn dreams. Tobacco fields spread where forest once stood. Small houses crouch beside outbuildings. Piers jut into muddy water. Boats nudge the shore like restless animals. It is a world built quickly and badly, always hungry for labour, always pretending it is becoming civilized while surviving on exhaustion. For black Americans, if that phrase can even fit this moment neatly, life in 1650 is wrapped in uncertainty. Many people around you do not yet speak with the hard legal confidence that later centuries will use. They do not always agree on what a black person is in law, in religion, or in labour. Some call you servant, some say slave. Some barely bother with either word and simply act as though your body belongs wherever they place it. The colony thrives on this confusion. Ambiguity can be very useful when powerful men want every option open. That is the strange cruelty of this year. There is no clear freedom. There is also no clear protection. You live in a space between categories, and the space itself is dangerous. When the first light spreads across the yard, it reveals the ordinary roughness of colonial life. Barrels sit slick with dew. A cartwheel leans against a post. Chickens peck at nothing. Smoke threads upward from a cook fire, carrying the smell of damp fuel and cornmeal. Your hands are stiff from yesterday's work. Your shoulders know the day before your mind fully wakes. Everything around you is physical. Rope against palm, splinters in fingers, cold air in lungs, mud pulling at your shoes, if you have shoes. Most people in the English colonies work brutally hard. That is one of the plain truths of the 17th century. White indentured servants labour under contracts and punishment. Poor women carry water, chop food, mend cloth, and keep households alive with near magical persistence. Children work as soon as they can manage it. Wealth exists, but it is patchy. Comfort is rare. Yet none of this rough equality lasts when race begins to settle like dust over every task. Hardship is common. Vulnerability is not shared equally. You notice this in the glances, in who gets ordered twice, in who can speak back a little, in who gets watched even while standing still, in who is imagined as temporary labour and who is slowly being imagined as permanent labour. The shift is not always announced. It creeps. Some black people in the colonies were born in Africa and carried across the Atlantic through violence, disease, and terror. Others were born in the Americas. Some arrived through Spanish or Portuguese routes before entering English control. A few learned several languages, moving through African memories, Atlantic trade speech, and English commands with weary skill. People around you often pretend this complexity does not exist. It is easier for them to sort human beings into one flat category. Yet you know, even in silence, that black life here begins in many places. Names carry this tension. An African name may survive in private, spoken softly among trusted people, or hidden inside memory like a small protected flame. A Christian name may be forced onto public use. Records may shorten, misspell, flatten, or erase. A clerk scratches something hurried into a ledger, and suddenly that becomes the official version of you. It is a strange magic, the colonial kind. Ink can narrow a life in one line. Historians still argue whether the English colonists of this exact period fully understood the racial system they were building, or whether they stumbled into it through improvisation, profit, and repeated acts of convenience. You can feel both possibilities at once. There are moments when the rules seem messy because the colony is young. There are other moments when the messiness feels deliberate, because unclear rules help owners claim whatever outcome benefits them most. Confusion, after all, can be a weapon. Morning deepens, work begins. Perhaps you head toward tobacco, the crop that chews through land and bodies alike. Tobacco is fussy, greedy, and endlessly demanding. It wants cleared fields, constant tending, careful curing, and reliable shipment. The leaves smell green and bitter at first, then sharp and heavy in the curing houses. The plant has made fortunes for a few men and misery for many others. Your day bends around it. You stoop, you lift, you sort, you carry. Hours move through your muscles instead of through a clock. The sun rises and presses warmth onto your back. Sweat gathers under your clothes. Gnats hover near your face. Dirt works its way beneath your nails and into the creases of your hands. The field hums with insects, distant orders, and the dry rustle of leaves shifting in the breeze. No grand speech explains your status while you work. The body learns what the law has not finished writing. Not every black person in 1650 works in the same setting. Some are in households, some on farms, some around docks, some hired for skilled tasks. A few know animal care, carpentry, boat handling, metalwork, or cooking techniques that make them valuable in ways colonists rarely admit with proper respect. There are black men who understand tides better than the merchant giving orders. Black women whose knowledge of food, herbs, or textiles keeps households functioning. Skilled labour can improve daily conditions slightly. It does not guarantee safety. Value can protect you 1 week and trap you the next. A quirky detail from this era is that colonial records sometimes reveal black people owning small amounts of property, completing contracts, or appearing in court in ways that later centuries would make far harder. These moments can sound almost encouraging when read too quickly. They were real, but fragile. A cow, a few tools, a promised term of service, a baptized child, a testimony before local officials. Such facts do not prove fairness, they prove instability. The future has not closed every door yet, but many doors swing on hinges controlled by others. Religion adds another layer to the uncertainty. English colonists like to imagine themselves as Christian people building godly communities, though they fight, cheat, drink, beat servants, and grab land with impressive consistency. You may hear prayers at dawn or scripture at supper. You may be urged to attend instruction. Baptism becomes a question with sharp edges. If you become Christian, does that change your legal condition? Some say yes, because spiritual kinship ought to matter. Others quickly decide it should not matter at all, which is rather convenient for anyone invested in lifelong bondage. The church bell, when there is one, sounds oddly tender in such a place. Its notes float through smoke and marsh air, asking for order from a society that does not possess much of it. You stand among others and hear words about salvation, obedience, mercy, and the equality of souls before God. They are beautiful ideas. The problem is that beauty often stops at the church door. By midday, the colony smells warmer and harsher. Sweat, manure, river mud, hot wood, cooking fat, and tobacco leaves mix into one dense breath of air. Flies gather everywhere. Sunlight strikes the open yard hard enough to make your eyes narrow. The fabric against your neck grows rough with salt. A bucket handle bites your palm. Somewhere a child cries and is quickly hushed. somewhere a man laughs too loudly at a joke that probably hides a threat. Meals are simple: corn mush, salted meat when available, peas, beans, perhaps fish. Sometimes there is enough, sometimes not. Hunger is a background fact of life for many poor colonists. Yet again, there are layers to that hardship. Those with legal recognition, family backing, or promised freedom can imagine a future meal under their own roof. For black people with uncertain status, even the next year may feel foggy. You eat with the body's gratitude and the mind's unease. You also learn to read people. Not letters on a page, though perhaps those too, if luck or secrecy allows, but posture, tone, timing, which overseer is lazy, which mistress is pious in public and hard in private, which clerk may record a term fairly, which neighbour might testify on your behalf, which conversation turns dangerous when you enter earshot. Survival depends on this reading. The colony is full of unwritten knowledge, and unwritten knowledge can keep you alive. There are small human moments. Of course, they matter because otherwise the story becomes all machinery and no breath. You hear someone humming while they work, a tune carried from somewhere far older than the settlement. You catch the smell of onions frying and remember another kitchen, or perhaps only imagine one. You feel the evening breeze cool the sweat on your arms, and for 1 minute the day loosens its grip. Someone shares a joke so dry it barely looks like humour at all. Gentle sarcasm has probably always been available to tired people. History does not record enough of it. Children move through this world absorbing its rules before anyone explains them. They carry water, chase birds, fetch kindling, sweep thresholds, and listen from corners. A black child in 1650 may grow up in a colony that has not fully decided what will happen to them, which is its own kind of horror. When does a child notice the uncertainty? Perhaps when another child is corrected less sharply for the same mistake. Perhaps when a promise is made and not kept. Perhaps when grown people lower their voices as legal words pass between them like bad weather. The afternoon light begins to tilt. Shadows lengthen across the yard and field. Work slows only because bodies must. The sky softens from hard white to a warmer gold. Birds fuss in the trees. The river catches light in broken pieces. At this hour, tiredness makes everything more honest. The colony looks less like a bold English project and more like what it is, a precarious place stitched together by labour, fear, appetite, and wishful thinking. There is another scholarly uncertainty here. Researchers debate how quickly black communities, however small or scattered, formed durable cultural bonds in these early English colonies. The records are thin, and often written by people who barely noticed what mattered most. Yet it is hard to imagine that memory simply vanished on arrival. Food habits, mourning customs, planting knowledge, rhythms of speech, gestures of comfort, ways of braiding hair, ways of telling a child who they are when official papers deny it. Such things rarely announce themselves to the archive. They survive quietly. As evening comes, sound changes first. Tools stop striking, voices lower. Frogs begin their wet, steady music near the marsh. Insects thicken in the grass. Fire crackles. The smell of smoke returns. Softer now, mixed with stew and river damp. The air cools against your face. Your feet ache in pulses. Your back complains each time you straighten. You sit, or crouch, or lean against rough wood, and the grain presses into your skin. Night can feel gentler than day, though never entirely safe. Darkness hides expression. It also hides plans. In some places, people talk more freely by the fire than they ever could under noon supervision. News travels in fragments. A ship has arrived. A master has died. A servant ran. A court made a decision in a town miles away. Someone was granted years. Someone lost them. Someone baptized a child. Someone was sold. In a colony where rules are still forming, rumour matters because rumour may become tomorrow's law. You look up at the sky, if clouds permit. The stars over the 17th century are brutally clear. No street lamps, no engines, no electric hum. Just darkness and points of cold light scattered over a settlement still pretending it understands itself. Under that sky, your uncertainty is both very large and oddly intimate. It lives in documents, sermons, contracts, habits, skin, labor, and desire. It lives in every person who sees you and decides, silently, what they think you can be. That is what life is like for Black Americans in 1650. Not simple slavery in the later codified sense, not anything close to freedom either. It is a life lived inside unstable boundaries, where possibility exists just enough to make denial sting more sharply. You wake, work, watch, remember, endure. The colony calls itself new, but already it is learning old human tricks. Keep the rules vague, keep profit clear, call it order, sleep uneasily, and so the fire settles into red embers. The night air smells of ash, damp grass, and the river turning slow in the dark. Someone nearby murmurs a prayer. Someone else turns over in exhausted silence. Your hands rest at last, though not peacefully. Tomorrow will come without answering the question that hangs over this place. What are you allowed to hope for here? In 1650, nobody with power seems eager to say. That silence tells you almost everything. Morning comes with the smell of tar, brine, and wet rope. The harbour stirs before the sun fully lifts, and the whole shoreline feels tense, as if even the water is busy. Wooden hulls creak against their moorings. Small waves slap the posts beneath the dock. Men shout over cargo lists, curses, and prices. Somewhere a gull lands on a barrel and complains with theatrical outrage, as though it owns the place. In a way, it has as much right as anyone without papers. You step into a world where names matter deeply, yet names are always being trimmed, altered, lost, or replaced. Around the docks and storehouses, identity is handled like merchandise. Clerks scratch notes with hurried ink. Merchants count bodies and goods with the same practical expression. A person may be described by skin, sex, age, scars, language, strength, or usefulness, all in a few cold words. What they rarely describe is interior life. The ache of missing home does not fit cleanly beside tobacco weights. This is one of the sharpest facts of black life in 1650. The colony wants labour, and labour is easier to control when memory is weakened. A remembered father, a remembered village, a remembered river, a remembered name spoken properly by someone who loves you. These things resist ownership. So the machinery of colonial record-keeping grows around reduction. A person becomes a line in an inventory. A line becomes a category. A category begins to feel permanent because it has been written down. The paper itself is not impressive. It smells of dust, oil, and damp wood. It wrinkles in humid air. Ink blots where a clerk moves too fast. Yet those shabby pages can follow you longer than flesh wounds. A record might call you Negro man, woman, girl, boy, servant, slave, baptized, unbaptized, imported, purchased, assigned. Sometimes a first name appears, sometimes not. Sometimes a name that sounds African is bent into an English spelling. Sometimes a Christian name is added as if fresh labelling solves everything. The page looks calm, its consequences are not. You may know yourself by one name in your own heart and hear another shouted across the yard. Both can become real in different ways. One carries ancestry, rhythm, memory. The other opens when a door slams and someone wants your labour immediately. Some people manage several selves in speech, one name for officials, one for the household. One whispered among trusted companions. It is not deceit. It is survival with grammar. The port brings people from many worlds into uneasy contact. English sailors with sour breath and sunburned necks, Dutch traders who bargain briskly, African captives who arrive terrified, sick, watchful, or stunned into silence. Black men already living in the colony who understand enough of the place to read danger in a merchant's tone. Indigenous traders moving through the edge of this economy, forced into its orbit without ever being fully absorbed by it. A port is crowded with transaction, and transaction does not encourage tenderness. Still, tenderness appears. It appears in the smallest possible units. A glance that says your language is familiar. A shared method of wrapping cloth. A rhythm tapped on a crate. The smell of food prepared in a way that suddenly cracks open memory so vividly your chest tightens. An older woman fixing a child's garment with practiced hands. These things are not grand resistance in the Romantic style later generations prefer. They are quieter than that. They are acts of keeping the self from being ground flat. The Atlantic world of 1650 is connected by ships. But ships do not only carry goods, they carry confusion, disease, rumour, language, and law in unfinished form. One colony treats a black labourer as a servant with a term. Another assumes lifelong bondage. One household permits baptism and hopes it creates obedience. Another fears baptism might complicate ownership. One local court hears a black witness. Another barely imagines such a thing. The inconsistency is not merciful. It leaves your life vulnerable to the whim of whoever claims authority nearest you. You can hear that authority in the warehouse, boots on planks, keys at a belt, the scrape of a barrel being rolled into place, men discussing exchange rates, shipping losses, and spoilage as if the world exists to be accounted for. Sugar, tobacco, indigo, hides, iron tools, cloth, human beings. The list keeps moving. You stand in a system that does not yet hide its greed behind elegant language. It is coarse, direct, and often badly organised. That roughness can make it seem less dangerous than it is. In truth, a sloppy system may be worse, because sloppiness gives powerful people room to improvise. A mainstream historical truth runs through this whole scene. The English colonies in the mid-17th century depended on bound labour to survive and expand. That labour included indentured Europeans, but black labour was increasingly singled out for deeper control. The process was still uneven in 1650, yet the direction of travel was becoming visible. Race was turning into a convenient answer for men who wanted permanent workforces and tidy hierarchies. They would say this was natural. It was profitable first. The smell inside a ship can stay in your mind longer than any spoken command. Salt, rot, tar, old bilge water, vomit, sweat, damp wood, sickness. Even after landing, people carry the ship with them, on clothes, in coughs, in the way they sleep lightly, in the way some stare at open water with something beyond fear, something like personal betrayal. The Atlantic crossing was not only a journey, it was a campaign against the body and the memory. Yet memory survives badly and stubbornly, whereas a step, which is still survival. Some black people in English colonies arrive through chains of exchange that make their personal histories almost impossible for later records to reconstruct. A person may have passed through several ports, been sold more than once, renamed multiple times, and described differently at each stop. That is one reason historians have so many gaps. The archive is full of labels but poor at listening. It records possession more clearly than personhood. Scholars continue to debate how many individual stories have been flattened beyond recovery by this bureaucratic habit of simplification. The answer is almost certainly too many. You notice how colonists talk about memory when it belongs to them. They treasure family Bibles, inherited spoons, letters from England, the smell of a mother's kitchen, the field boundaries of a father's farm, the churchyard where grandparents lie. Their own past is called heritage. Yours is treated as inconvenience, or worse, as evidence that you do not quite belong to civilization unless they translate you first. The hypocrisy is almost funny in a bleak way. People who crossed an ocean to preserve their identity can be remarkably hostile to yours. Yet memory does not need their permission. It lives in sound, in a hum under the breath while grinding grain, in a phrase repeated with care to keep its shape, in ways of comforting the sick, braiding hair, seasoning broth, carrying a child, greeting the morning, or mourning the dead. It lives in avoidance too, in the refusal to say certain names aloud where others can steal them, in the habit of guarding what is sacred by making it look ordinary. Colonies are noisy, but memory can move quietly. There is a peculiar tidbit from these years that feels almost too strange for a sleepy history tale, yet it fits perfectly. Colonial scribes sometimes described people with remarkable precision about clothing, scars, teeth, or posture when trying to identify them, especially in run notices or inventories. The descriptions can be vivid enough to conjure a living body in the mind, and still the same document may fail to preserve the person's own story, family, or origin. A missing front tooth may survive in the archive more clearly than a mother's name. History can be absurdly rude. The shore itself has a texture you cannot ignore. Splintered docks under bare feet, sharp shell fragments near the tide line, sticky tar on a post, fish scales drying like silver paper in the sun, salt crystals on a rope, a damp wind that makes linen cling to the skin. The harbour is a place of movement, but not everyone there moves freely. You can watch a ship depart and know that distance exists without choice. Freedom is not the same as motion. Plenty of people are moved around against their will. Markets gather around these ports because markets gather anywhere empire sees opportunity. Voices overlap in English, Dutch, fragments of African languages, and the universal grammar of bargaining. A woman haggles over fabric. A merchant inspects casks. A child chases a chicken through a lane and is scolded by 3 different adults at once. Smoke drifts from cook fires, carrying the smell of beans, onions, dried fish, and perhaps a little spice if fortune has smiled on the pot. Life continues even in a place built on extraction. That is one of history's least charming habits. At times you may be addressed by a title that suggests religion has softened the world. Brother, sister, Christian. Such words can comfort. They can also hide danger when spoken by someone who sees no contradiction between prayer and possession. Baptism, in particular, sits inside this section of life like a question nobody wants to settle honestly. If your soul is equal before God, what does that do to the claims of earthly owners? Some ministers preach one thing, planters practice another, and clerks write something that supports whichever man has more land. You also learn the politics of pronunciation. An English master may mangle an African name not only out of ignorance but from disinterest. To pronounce properly would require admitting that the name belongs to a world as real as his own. Better to shorten it, flatten it, or replace it with John, Mary, Tom, Bess, or some other familiar sound that makes administration easier. Convenience often masquerades as normality. The colony does this constantly. It names to tame. By late afternoon, the light on the water turns coppery and soft. Crates throw long shadows across the dock. The labour of counting slows, though it never ends. A clerk sands fresh ink. A boy sweeps debris into the harbour and watches it drift away. A woman balances a basket on her head with elegant certainty while men nearby struggle to carry a single barrel straight. Little daily ironies like that are excellent medicine for the spirit. They do not end in justice, but they offer a private smile. Perhaps the hardest part of life without clear freedom is that hope must stay practical. Not grand rescue, not dramatic speeches. Practical hope, a fair recording of service years, a witness who remembers what was promised, a neighbour who uses your chosen name, a child taught where they come from, even if only in fragments, a chance to hold some object, some song, some story that proves the world did not begin with your capture. Memory becomes a possession no inventory can honestly price, though many have tried in everything but words. As evening settles, the harbour sounds grow deeper. Chains clink, water bumps the pilings. A distant voice sings a line that the wind distorts before it reaches you. Smoke hangs low, smelling of pine and fish oil. The sky bruises into purple. Bats cut quick shapes overhead. In this half-light, objects lose sharp edges. People do too. The colony seems almost gentle when seen from a distance at dusk. That is one more trick of atmosphere. Beauty and brutality have always shared waterfront property. You lie down eventually, or sit in a corner with your back against rough boards, and listen to the sea breathe in the dark. Somewhere nearby, paper records dry with their fresh claims about who belongs to whom. Somewhere else. Another person repeats a true name under their breath so it will not be forgotten by morning. Between those two acts lies the whole struggle of this world. The colony writes one version, the heart keeps another. In 1650 for black Americans, survival often depends on protecting the second one from the first. Before the first pale line of dawn appears, you are already awake, not fully awake in the noble, poetic sense, more in the blunt, uncomfortable way of a body that has learned not to trust extra sleep. The air is cold enough to make your nose sting. Straw pricks through thin bedding. A draught snakes under the door or through gaps in the wall, brushing your ankles like a small unwelcome ghost. Somewhere outside, an animal shifts in its pen and lets out a low complaint. The colony starts as sound before it becomes light. This is the hour when labour reveals its true personality. Daytime can make work look orderly. Men issue commands. Rows appear neat. Tasks can be described. But before sunrise, when your hands are still stiff and your stomach already wonders about food, labour feels more honest. It is hunger tied to routine. It is movement before thought. It is the quiet surrender of the body to another long stretch of effort. In tobacco country, the land does not care who owns it on paper. It cares about weather, drainage, clearing, and relentless attention. Still, human ownership is pressed onto every part of the landscape. Fields hacked from woodland, fences set where trees once stood, paths beaten hard by many feet, ditches cut to move water, curing sheds carrying the stale, sweet, almost peppery smell of leaf and smoke. You step into this world while the sky remains dark blue and the earth is damp enough to soak through rough shoes, if you have them, or chill bare feet if you do not. The first task may be as simple as lifting a bucket, gathering tools, feeding animals, or raking coals back to life. Nothing about these jobs looks dramatic in a record book, yet each chore belongs to a chain of survival that never really stops. Fires must be maintained, water must be carried, livestock must not wander off and become some neighbour's convenient opportunity. Implements must be found, mended, or sharpened. The colony is forever repairing itself badly. It has the air of something built yesterday and already wearing out. You feel the work in your hands first. The grain of a wooden handle pressing into your palm. Damp rope rough against skin. Mud trying to keep your foot every time you step. Your shoulders complain as soon as you lift. Your lower back begins its daily argument with the world. This is true for many labourers in 1650, not only for black workers. The difference sits in the future attached to the pain. Some people suffer toward a contract's end, some toward wages, some toward a piece of land, however small. For black Americans living in uncertainty, pain often arrives without a reliable promise attached to it. The field itself wakes, slowly. At first it is mostly smell, wet soil, trampled grass, a bitter green edge from tobacco plants, wood smoke drifting from the yard, the faint sourness of old sweat in cloth worn too many days. Then sound emerges, a crow somewhere in the trees, the creak of a cart axle, a man clearing his throat with great seriousness, as though he has been assigned the role of official dawn trumpet. Then the voices begin. Orders, mutters, greetings, complaints, jokes too dry to count as comfort and too familiar to count as rebellion. Human beings are strange creatures, even under pressure. Someone always finds a way to be sarcastic before sunrise. Tobacco dominates much of this world because it promises cash, and cash speaks clearly to men who often pretend morality is more important. The plant is delicate in certain stages and demanding in all of them. It drains the soil. It wants careful planting, weeding, topping, worming, cutting, curing, sorting, packing, and transport. It can make a plantation owner feel grand while everyone else feels tired. It is one of those crops that turned colonial ambition into a system of daily exhaustion. A mainstream historical fact shapes every movement here. By the middle of the 17th century, the Chesapeake colonies were rapidly expanding tobacco production, and that expansion required tremendous amounts of labour. At first, much of the English labour force came through indentured servitude, but planters increasingly relied on black labour in more permanent ways, even while the legal framework remained uneven. You live inside that transition. The field is not just a place of work. It is a place where social order is being tested with hoes, hands, and ledgers. Morning light finally stretches across the rows, faint and grey at first, then warmer. Leaves catch droplets of dew that dampen your sleeves when you brush past. The tobacco plants stand broad and slightly sticky, and their scent clings to your hands. You bend to weed. You inspect leaves. You move steadily, because slowness draws attention, and speed must be rationed carefully if the day is to be survived. The body learns pace the way sailors learn current. Around you, the people in the field carry different legal stories, even if the work makes them look similar from a distance. A white indentured servant counts years like a prisoner marking stone, hoping the contract is honoured. A black labourer may have been promised a term, may have no term, or may not know whether any promise will stand once challenged. Another person may have gained freedom in one household, only to find that freedom barely recognisable in public life. The same field can hold several futures, and not one of them is comfortable. That uncertainty changes the mood of every command. If someone tells you to work harder, it is not merely about this hour. It may be about a lifetime being silently measured. It may be about whether your labour is seen as temporary obligation or natural condition. The colony has not fully settled the question, which is exactly why each day matters so much. Repetition makes rules feel normal before they are even written clearly. The sun rises higher, warmth gathers on your neck, insects thicken, the earth softens, dirt cakes at the hem of your garment. Sweat begins to run down your back in a slow line that never quite cools. The field has a rhythm now, almost musical in its own punishing way. Bend, pull, step, carry, straighten, reach, bend again. The sound is leaves rustling, feet shifting, tools scraping, and breathing that gets heavier as morning turns to noon. Food, when it comes, tastes less like pleasure than interruption. Cornmeal, perhaps. Salt fish if fortune has been oddly generous. Beans, maybe. Small onions, a heel of bread, a little cider or water from a vessel that smells faintly of wooden iron. Hunger sharpens simple things, the rough texture of bread against your tongue, the salt lingering at the back of your mouth, the relief of stopping long enough to sit, even on a stump or bare ground. For a few moments, the body negotiates peace. Then it begins again. One of the quieter truths of plantation labour in this period is that much of the suffering lies in repetition rather than spectacle. Later centuries would produce a more codified, openly racial slave system, with its own terrible rituals of enforcement. In 1650, the violence can be inconsistent, improvised, and deeply personal. Punishment may come through beating, withholding, extension of service, sale, humiliation, or threat. But even when overt violence is absent for a day, the labour still works its way into bone and spirit. Exhaustion is one of the colony's favourite tools because it leaves little room for argument. You also notice how closely labour is tied to weather. A sudden rain changes everything. Heavy heat slows movement and makes tempers shorter. Wind can help drying or ruin it, depending on timing. Frost threatens. Drought threatens. Too much moisture threatens. Planters speak about weather with a drama usually reserved for war, and not without reason. Their prophets sit in the field. Your body does too. The sky has authority no one can challenge. A curious little detail from the tobacco world is that people sometimes use the leaves themselves almost like money. With tobacco serving as a unit of account in local exchange, imagine that. The same plant staining your hands and stealing your strength can also stand in for coin when men discuss debts and purchases. It is a rather colonial sort of joke. You work inside the money. You rarely keep it. By afternoon, the field smells different. The bright dampness of dawn gives way to hot green leaf, crushed stems, sweat, dust, and sun-warmed soil. The heat presses harder, shirts cling, flies settle on faces and are waved away with tired irritation. Muscles lose their first discipline and begin to tremble slightly with repeated strain. Shoulders burn, knees protest. Hands that were merely sore at dawn are now tender, dirty, and angry with you. In these hours, the mind wanders because it must. Sometimes it drifts toward remembered landscapes, a riverbank elsewhere, a village path, a patch of shade, the sound of a market in another language. Sometimes it narrows to almost nothing, attending only to the next plant, the next row, the next bucket. Labour can stretch time and erase it at once. A whole afternoon disappears into motion. Yet each minute also seems individually rude. Scholars continue to debate how much autonomy black workers in these early tobacco regimes could exercise within the workday, especially compared with later plantation systems. The evidence is uneven. Some records suggest task variation, negotiation, or relative mobility in specific contexts. Others show tightening control and severe dependency. You can believe both because colonial life is maddeningly inconsistent. The same owner may be careless one day and tyrannical the next. The same field may feel loosely supervised in one season and heavily watched in another. Uncertainty is not freedom. It is a moving fence. Women's labour in this setting often receives less attention in old records, though it is everywhere once you look properly. Black women work in fields, in food preparation, in washing, carrying, mending, tending children, helping the sick, processing crops, and sustaining the colony in ways that male writers often treat as background. Yet background work is the work that keeps everything standing. Without it, the proud tobacco world would collapse into hunger and mess by Tuesday. Late in the day, curing and handling become their own world of labour. Leaves must be cut and managed carefully. Bundles are moved into spaces where smoke and air do delicate battle. The curing houses have a particular smell, thick and dry, earthy and sharp, with a sweetness that turns heavy if you stay too long. Dust from the leaf can catch in your throat. The dim interiors feel close and warm, lit by thin shafts that slip through boards. Outside, the fields glow with tired gold. No one in power likes to admit how much intelligence this work demands. Good tobacco cannot be produced by fantasy alone. It takes judgment about timing, moisture, pests, colour and storage. Workers know these things intimately because their bodies are in constant conversation with the crop. Yet expertise does not guarantee respect. The colony is very good at taking skill and calling it obedience. As the sun lowers, voices soften from command to fatigue. Even the harshest overseer sounds less grand when sweat has soaked through his linen and gnats have been chewing his neck all day. Carts groan back toward the yard. Birds reappear at the field's edge. The sky begins to lose its hard brightness. Your arms feel oddly weightless once a load is set down, then strangely heavy again once you stop moving. Work ends not because the world becomes kind, but because darkness makes more labour inefficient. The walk back carries its own sensations. Dust on your shins, grass brushing your ankles, smoke rising from the cooking fire ahead, the smell of something boiling, plain but welcome. The sight of a bucket near the door can feel almost luxurious because it means washing. Cold water over sore hands is one of history's smallest and most reliable mercies. The skin tightens, dirt loosens, the body receives the chill with a grateful flinch. Evening in tobacco country is never silent. Frogs begin, crickets take over, cows shift in the distance, someone coughs near the fire, someone else laughs quietly, as if surprised the day did not swallow humour entirely. Children drowse against adults. Pots scrape. Spoons knock wood. The sky deepens into purple and then black, and the stars appear with that old, unnerving clarity known only to centuries without electric comfort. You lie down with the smell of smoke in your hair and earth still under your nails. Every muscle keeps a small record of the day. Hands remember the tool handle. Back remembers bending. Feet remember the rows, in 1650 for black Americans living in the tobacco colonies. Labour is not only toil, it is the daily stage on which status, race, profit, and power rehearse themselves until they become habit. Before a law is perfected, the field teaches everyone where to stand, and tomorrow, before sunrise, the lesson begins again in the dark. The house looks safer from a distance. That is its first trick. In the soft morning light, with smoke lifting from the chimney and dew still clinging to the yard, it can appear almost comforting. The walls stand straighter than the rough cabins nearby. The roof keeps out more rain. The door has a solid latch. Through the small window, a warm flicker suggests bread, broth, or porridge waiting near the hearth. A person might look at it and think indoor labour must surely be easier. A person would be wrong in several interesting ways. Household work in 1650 is close work, close to food, close to family quarrels, close to private moods, close to the invisible line that separates those who command from those who must anticipate command before it is spoken. The field exhausts the body openly, the house trains the nerves. Inside English colonial homes, black men, women, and children may cook, clean, carry water, wash garments, tend fires, serve tables, care for infants, spin fibre, mend cloth, fetch supplies, empty chamber pots, and step around the tempers of people who believe proximity equals ownership. The walls keep in heat. They also keep in tension. You enter before the sun has fully risen, and the house is already alive with smell. Ash from last night's fire, damp wool hanging near the hearth, onion, grease, maybe porridge thickening in a pot, soap, lye, and old wood. Sometimes a sharper scent rises from tanned leather or stored apples beginning to turn. The kitchen, if there is a separate one, hums with practical urgency. If the family cooks in the main room, every task mixes together. Eating, sleeping, praying, arguing, mending, plotting, scolding. Colonial domestic life has very little privacy, which makes hierarchy even more intimate. The mistress of the household may seem softer than the men who own land and talk loudly about business. Sometimes she is. Often she's simply powerful in a different register. She knows who ate extra. She knows which shirt was poorly washed. She notices when bread is burnt, when candles are wasted, when a child has not been properly hushed. Her authority may be constrained by husbands and custom, but within the household she can direct labour with relentless precision. A gentle voice does not necessarily mean a gentle day. This is one of the realities of household service for black Americans in the mid-17th century. Being near the family can bring slightly better clothing, warmer shelter, more regular food, or access to information. It can also mean constant scrutiny. Every gesture is visible, every delay is interpreted, every expression risks being called insolence. In the field, distance sometimes softens surveillance. In the house, eyes are everywhere. Even children learn to command. The child of the house may be 6 years old and already full of inherited certainty. He drops a cup and blames you. She demands something from the table without looking at your face. Their small shoes patter over the floorboards, while your own steps must remain useful and almost silent. That is how hierarchy reproduces itself so efficiently. It begins before anyone can spell. Still, household labour is complicated by familiarity. You may know the rhythms of the family better than they know themselves. Which infant needs rocking after dusk? Which daughter cries quietly when scolded? Which gentleman is impossible before breakfast? Which elderly relative wants broth cooled 3 times and then claims it's too cold? Such knowledge can create tiny zones of influence. You become necessary in ways that are never fully acknowledged. Necessary is not the same as secure, but it can shape the day. A mainstream historical fact underlies all of this. In 17th century English colonies, household labour was central to survival because domestic production handled food preparation, textile work, childcare, medicine, storage, and countless maintenance tasks. Homes were not passive places of rest. They were economic units. To work in one was to stand near the centre of colonial life. For black workers, that closeness made them useful and vulnerable at the same time. There are sounds unique to a busy colonial household. The crack of kindling, the hiss of damp wood catching flame, the rasp of a broom over plank floor, the knock of a wooden spoon against a pot, the wet slap of laundry against a wash surface, a baby's hungry cry rising without warning, a chair leg dragged too hard, a Bible closing after morning prayer. No orchestra has ever produced so many moods with so few instruments. Your hands are always busy, kneading dough, scrubbing linen in cold water that numbs the fingers first and burns them later, lifting iron pots heavy enough to challenge your wrists, trimming wicks, peeling roots, shaking crumbs from cloth, carrying chamber vessels with a face so neutral it becomes a kind of art. The touch of domestic work is rarely discussed by men writing grand histories, though it defines daily life. Wet cloth against knuckles, steam on cheeks, splinters from table edges, soap drying the skin until the hands look older than the face. Black women often bore the heaviest domestic expectations. though black men could also serve in household roles, stable work, crafts, or mixed labour between yard and interior. The colony liked fixed categories in theory, but in practice it used people wherever profit required. A woman might be cooking by dawn, hauling water by noon, and helping process crop goods by evening. A man might split wood, repair a fence, carry goods to market, and then sleep near the kitchen because the main house needed his labour at first light. Colonial households were inventive only when the inventiveness saved the owner's trouble. The kitchen can be its own kingdom of pressure. Bread must rise if flour exists. Meat must be salted, stewed, roasted, or stretched. Vegetables must be boiled into usefulness. Children must be fed before they become louder than the adults can tolerate. Fires must be watched constantly, because heat is life, and accidental fire is disaster. Smoke stings the eyes, grease spits, steam dampens the hairline. The room glows hot even in cool weather, and in summer it becomes a lesson in patience that no saint requested. And then there is the table. Serving food reveals rank with almost comic clarity. Who sits, who waits, who receives the better cut, who gets fresh bread, who drinks first, who clears the remains. A meal is not just a meal. It is a map of power drawn repeatedly until nobody mistakes the boundaries. You may prepare a dish expertly and never taste the best of it. You may know exactly how much honey remains in the house, and still be told there is none for you. Domestic order is full of these petty declarations. A quirky detail from colonial households is the importance of linen and the serious moral energy people attach to it. Clean household cloth could signal discipline, respectability, and godly management, even in homes where the people praising cleanliness had mud on their boots and cruelty in their habits. Sheets, napkins, shirts, and caps required endless washing, drying, mending, folding, and storing. Imagine an empire of virtue built partly on damp laundry and the opinions of people who smell faintly of smoke all year. Human dignity has been judged by sillier things. Scholars still disagree about how much leverage household workers, especially women, could sometimes gain through intimacy with the domestic sphere. Some evidence hints at negotiated favours, better rations, informal influence, or stronger chances of manumission in particular cases. Other evidence shows that closeness simply provided more opportunity for abuse, exploitation, and unrecorded coercion. Both can be true. Nearness to power can offer access. It can also expose you more completely to whim. Religion sits in the home as both performance and habit. Morning prayers, Bible reading, Sabbath expectations, blessings over food. The family presents itself as ordered under God. Yet Christian language often travels through rooms where labour is unfree and obedience is demanded by force as much as by faith. A mistress may quote scripture while assigning punishment. A master may ask about salvation after counting human labour like livestock. Domestic piety is one of colonial life's most polished contradictions. Children again sharpen the tension. Black children in or around the household may be expected to carry small items, rock babies, fetch wood chips, pluck poultry, or stand still for impossible periods. They learn quickly which adults can be approached and which cannot. White children absorb rank by imitation, but black children absorb risk by atmosphere. They notice the angle of a grown person's shoulders. They notice when a room goes quiet. They notice who is allowed to be childish and who must be useful. Clothing tells its own story indoors. Fabric brushes the skin differently depending on status, season, and task. Coarse linen scratches, wool irritates, aprons stiffen with work, sleeves must be rolled, tied back, or protected from ash and grease. Better garments might be handed down from the household, worn thin by others before reaching you. Even cast-off clothing can matter. A warmer bodice, stronger shoes, a less torn shirt. Such things can ease a day. They also remind you that comfort is distributed from above. There are moments of strange social theatre in the house. Guests arrive. Suddenly the family becomes a performance of order and gentility. Floors are swept more vigorously. Dishes are arranged with ceremony. Voices soften into hospitality. You move more carefully because appearances now matter intensely. A visitor may compliment the household's smooth running, while never considering how much labour invisibly produced that smoothness. It is one of the colony's favourite illusions. The home is presented as natural hierarchy, when in truth it is constant managed effort. You also become skilled at reading leftovers, both literal and emotional. Leftover broth may mean a decent evening meal. Leftover anger may mean stepping lightly near the doorway. Leftover pride after guests depart may make the master generous for 10 minutes. Leftover shame after a family argument may make the mistress sharp with everyone. Domestic service is not merely physical, it is atmospheric. You learn weather patterns made of human mood. As afternoon settles, light moves across the interior in narrow bands through small windows. Dust floats visibly. The fire burns lower, then must be coaxed up again. Laundry dries stiff on lines or racks. The smell of yeast, herbs, smoke, and soap mingles into something strangely comforting if you ignore the hierarchy attached to it. Outside, yard animals shuffle and call. Inside, work continues almost without punctuation. The house eats labour the way the field eats daylight, yet not every moment is bleak. A child falls asleep warm against your shoulder. Bread emerges from the oven with a cracked golden top and smells almost holy. A kettle sings softly before boiling over. An elderly woman in the household, perhaps less invested in performance than the younger adults, asks for a story or tells one. A joke slips out while plucking feathers and earns an honest laugh. Such moments matter because they remind you that humanity survives in cramped rooms too. By evening, the household shifts from bustle to containment. Doors are barred, candles are trimmed, bowls are stacked, ashes banked for morning. The family settles into prayer, talk, silence, or complaint, depending on temperament and weather. Your own body feels the weight of the day differently than field labour, but no less truly. Arms ache from lifting, fingers wrinkle from water, back tightens from bending over tubs and tables, feet throb from standing on hard surfaces. Fatigue is simply dressed in indoor clothes. When darkness deepens, the house breathes more slowly. Boards creak as people turn in sleep. The last fire sound is a soft collapse inward. In that hush, one truth becomes very clear. The household is not a refuge from colonial power. It is one of its most important workshops. Here children learn rank, adults rehearse authority, women administer hierarchy through domestic order, and black labour is folded into the intimate machinery of everyday life. The house may look calm by candlelight. It is still one of the places where the colony decides who must serve and who may simply be served. The courthouse is not grand. That is almost the most unsettling thing about it. You might expect a building that decides human futures to carry some weight of stone, some noble silence, some warning carved above the door. Instead, in 1650, legal authority in the English colonies often lives in plain wooden rooms that smell of damp paper, tobacco, sweat, and boot leather, a table, benches, ink, men with opinions, a clerk scratching lines that may outlast everyone present. The setting looks ordinary enough to lull the senses. The consequences are anything but ordinary. You enter a world where status has not yet settled into one clean colonial formula. That uncertainty wraps itself around black life like fog. Some people insist you're a servant with years to complete. Others treat you as a slave for life without bothering to define the difference carefully. Some cases hinge on baptism, parentage, skin colour, prior custom or spoken promises. Others hinge on little more than who holds power locally and how much anyone wishes to contest it. Law exists here, but it behaves more like weather than architecture. This is the core truth of the moment. You are living through a period when categories are being fought over, not merely applied. That makes daily life dangerous in a distinct way. In a later, more fully codified slave society, the brutality becomes more explicit and systematic. In 1650, cruelty often wears the face of ambiguity. You're not sure what protections exist because those protections may vanish when challenged. A promise might hold. A promise might also dissolve into the air the moment it becomes inconvenient. Imagine the feel of paper placed on the table. Dry, thin, slightly rough. A contract can seem very real when someone taps it with a finger. Years of service, terms, conditions, witnesses. But contracts depend on enforcement, and enforcement depends on people who may not consider a black person's claim worth preserving. You might serve under an agreement and still discover that time does not free you if someone decides to reinterpret the arrangement. The law in these colonies can be terribly creative when profit is nearby. A white indentured servant usually has a term. However harsh the years may be, 7 years, perhaps, maybe more if penalties are added for running away, pregnancy, theft, or disobedience. The system is cruel enough on its own, yet it contains a visible endpoint, at least in principle. For black labourers, that endpoint often blurs. One person gains freedom after a term, another does not. Another sees service extended through some dispute. Another is treated as lifelong property, though no one can clearly explain when the lifetime clause entered the room. That is how racial hierarchy grows in practice. Not all at once, but through repeated exceptions that favour the powerful. The courtroom sounds strange because law is mostly spoken before it is fixed. Voices rise and fall. Someone clears his throat theatrically. A bench creaks. A clerk pauses to sand fresh ink. Outside, a cart passes over uneven ground. Inside, men discuss years of another person's life with the practical tone they might use for a boundary fence or a damaged hogshead. The contrast is hard to forget. Human destiny meets provincial administration. Administration usually wins. One mainstream historical fact stands squarely here. During the mid-17th century, English colonial law regarding black labour was inconsistent and still developing, especially in places like Virginia and Maryland. Court cases from this era reveal uncertainty about whether black people were servants under contract, slaves for life, or something unstable between the two. That instability was not neutral. Over time, it bent toward permanent racial bondage. The phrase "something between" captures the mood better than many legal terms. Because what exactly are you when your labour is demanded like a slave's, your name recorded like property, your Christian status discussed like a technical inconvenience, and your freedom perhaps spoken of as a future possibility that keeps retreating? You are inside a category still under construction, and the builders are not on your side. This uncertainty shapes ordinary conversations. A planter speaks of buying a black man and means permanent ownership, though the paperwork may be less clear than he pretends. Another person says servant because the word sounds more respectable, or because the local custom has not fully hardened. A minister objects softly to excess severity but not to the labour itself. A neighbour shrugs and says the courts will settle it. Meanwhile, your body continues working while men debate your classification like an interesting colonial problem. The law can turn on lineage as well. If a person's mother is black, what follows? If a father is English, what follows? In 1650, these rules are not yet fully standardised in every English colony, which means parentage becomes another site of argument and exploitation. Children born into this world do not arrive in innocence alone. They arrive in legal suspense. Adults around them may already be calculating what category will bring them most labour with the least challenge. There is something especially chilling about suspense when attached to a child. A baby wrapped in cloth near the hearth should call forth softness. Instead, in this colonial setting, birth can trigger questions about status, inheritance, ownership, and service. The room smells of milk, smoke, and damp linen, and still someone is thinking in legal terms. Empires are excellent at making paperwork appear where tenderness ought to be. A curious detail from the records of this broader period is how often people appear in court over seemingly narrow disputes that reveal huge consequences. A term of service contested, a witness statement about origin, a claim that one person had completed an agreed number of years, a debate over whether prior baptism should matter. The entry in the court book might be brief, almost insultingly brief, yet tucked inside that little summary is an entire life pivoting on local opinion. Colonial archives can feel like a series of trapdoors hidden under ordinary words. You can see why powerful men liked legal vagueness for a time. It offered flexibility. If labour was scarce, a black worker could be treated as permanently bound. If custom needed softening for appearance or convenience, a different label might be used. Ambiguity lets authority test several versions of domination before choosing its favourite. By the time the rules become formal, habit has already done much of the work. People are often prepared to accept injustice once they have practiced it casually for years. Scholars continue to argue over how intentional this process was. Some suggest that colonial elites deliberately moved toward racial slavery as an economic strategy, making use of law to secure a permanent labour force. Others emphasize the messy, improvised nature of 17th century colonies, where practice often ran ahead of statute and local custom mattered greatly. From where you stand, the distinction may feel rather academic. Whether carefully designed or opportunistically assembled, the system still presses in one direction. Your uncertainty feeds someone else's confidence. The physical setting of legal life deepens the mood. You wait in a yard outside the courthouse or assembly space. Dust sits on your shoes. Sun warms the side of the building. Flies orbit lazily. Horses stamp and toss their heads nearby. Men speak in low clusters, occasionally glancing your way as though you're both person and case material. The smell is a mixture of animals, old timber, pipe smoke, and summer heat trapped in fabric. Nothing about the scene announces justice. It announces local power. If you are called to speak, your words may be weighed differently from those of white witnesses. Not always excluded outright, because the period is inconsistent, but filtered through prejudice, status, and convenience. A black person's testimony might be heard in some circumstances and discounted in others. That inconsistency itself becomes part of the cruelty. You cannot rely on exclusion or inclusion because either may appear depending on who benefits. Rules that change under pressure are difficult to live inside with dignity. Planters understand the value of precedent even when they do not use the word elegantly. One favourable ruling becomes something to point at later. One disputed service term becomes an excuse to push another farther. One successful claim of a lifelong bondage becomes a pattern. That is how colonies think. They are always turning accidents into customs and customs into rules. A muddy practice repeated enough times begins to feel like the natural order of things. The phrase for life starts appearing with a heavier shadow over black labour. It may not yet control every case, every county, every household, but the idea is gaining strength, and ideas like this do not remain abstract for long. They alter how people are bought, sold, punished, and imagined. They alter whether your labour is seen as borrowed or owned. They alter whether hope is practical or increasingly fragile. A legal phrase can change the weather of a whole society. At the same time, rare stories of black freedom still exist in the colonies. Some individuals gain release after terms of service. Some acquire property. Some marry. Some appear in transactions not merely as labour but as legal actors. These cases matter because they prove that the boundaries were not fully sealed in 1650. Yet their rarity also matters. Exceptional survival can be mistaken for fairness by people who badly want a cheerful narrative. One swallow does not create a summer, and one free household does not redeem a system leaning hard toward bondage. Daily life under uncertain status involves constant calculation. Should you trust a spoken promise? Should you seek baptism if it may or may not help? Should you save small goods if you might be moved elsewhere? Should you form attachments in a place where sale, transfer, or extension of service can scatter lives quickly? Even rest becomes complicated because the future cannot be measured cleanly. A tired body wants sleep, a worried mind wants guarantees. The colony offers very few. Inside households and fields, people absorb legal change before they read it. A mistress grows bolder in command. A planter speaks more openly of ownership. A clerk chooses different words in a ledger. A child repeats what adults say and adds the confidence of innocence. You can feel society tightening before the statutes are fully visible. Law is not only written in books, it is rehearsed in tone, gesture, expectation, and the length of time someone thinks they may claim your labour without challenge. By late afternoon, the legal building empties into light. Decisions travel outward in conversation long before they settle into record. Someone says a black man has lost his claim. Someone says a woman's term was not recognised. Someone says the judges favoured the planter. Someone else repeats it at a tavern over tobacco smoke and beer. The information spreads across roads, kitchens, yards, and fields. News in a small colony moves like fire in dry grass. Everyone understands that a ruling about one person may become a warning to many others. Taverns help carry this legal atmosphere into ordinary life. They smell of spilled drink, wood smoke, damp wool, and men who believe themselves wise after 3 cups. Here contracts are discussed, rumours embroidered, and status interpreted with great confidence by people who understand half the law at best. A planter may boast, a servant may brood, a merchant may calculate what changes in labour categories mean for future purchases. Colonial society loves to turn human vulnerability into evening conversation. As night comes, you return to quarters, kitchen space, yard edge, or wherever sleep is permitted. The day has been full not of spectacular violence, perhaps, but of uncertainty thick enough to tire the spirit. You lie down under rough cloth, hearing insects outside and the last murmur of voices fading. The darkness does not erase the question hanging over your life. Am I bound for years or forever? In 1650, for many black Americans, that question has no trustworthy answer, and that lack of answer is already becoming part of the system itself. Sunday morning carries a different kind of noise. The colony does not become quiet. Exactly. It simply rearranges its sounds into something more solemn. Boots strike packed earth on the way to worship. A bell may ring if the settlement is organised enough to possess one. If not, a voice summons people instead. Doors open, children are scrubbed into temporary respectability, throats are cleared, hats are adjusted. Someone mutters that the sermon will be long, someone else insists that long sermons are good for the soul, which is the sort of statement usually made by people who do not have to stir the porridge before dawn. You move toward church or prayer gathering with everyone else, breathing in cool air that smells of wet grass, wood smoke, old wool, and the faint sweetness of autumn leaves if the season is kind. The building, when there is one, is plain. Rough boards, narrow windows, hard benches, a pulpit raised just enough to make authority visible. In poorer places, worship may happen in a hall, a private room, or any structure the colony can temporarily pretend is sacred. God, it seems, is expected to be flexible about architecture. For black Americans in 1650, Christianity offers both promise and danger. You hear words about salvation, mercy, repentance, and the equality of souls before God. These are not small ideas. They can comfort, especially in a world that constantly tries to reduce you to labour. A sermon may tell you that heaven does not recognise the vanity of earthly rank. A prayer may insist that all are creatures of the same divine maker. For a moment, the room might feel as though it belongs to one human family. Then the service ends, and the colony remembers itself. That is the central tension of faith in this era. Spiritual language rises beautifully above earthly order, but earthly order waits outside the church door with a ledger in one hand and a command in the other. Colonists are perfectly capable of kneeling beside you in prayer and then speaking of your service as though grace should make you more obedient, not more human. Religion in this setting can soothe the spirit while tightening the harness. Baptism sits at the heart of this uncertainty. Water on the forehead, words spoken over the body, a Christian name perhaps added. In a purely theological sense, baptism marks entry into the community of believers. In practical colonial life, it triggers questions nobody powerful wants answered too generously. If a black person is baptized, does that alter their legal condition? Does a Christian own another Christian in the same way? Does conversion imply kinship, obligation, equality of some kind, even a small amount? Planters hear these questions and suddenly become very interested in narrowing theology. A mainstream historical fact runs through this whole dilemma. In the 17th century English colonies, there was real uncertainty over whether Christian baptism should affect enslavement or servitude, especially for black people. Over time, colonial authorities moved to make clear that baptism did not free an enslaved person. That clarification did not arise by accident. It emerged because too many people recognized the contradiction, and elites wanted it settled in favor of ownership inside the church. The sensory world is oddly intimate, damp coats steaming slightly as bodies warm the room, wax or tallow candles giving off their faint fatty scent, the scratch of wool sleeves against rough benches, the sweet dusty smell of old paper from a Bible handled by many hands, sunlight slanting through a small window and landing on floating dust motes as if holiness can be measured in tiny drifting particles. A baby fusses, someone coughs, boards creak whenever a latecomer sits. Sacred life in the colonies is stubbornly physical. The minister speaks from above, and his voice may be deep, nasal, weary, thunderous, or soothing depending on talent and breakfast. He tells the congregation about sin. Everyone listens as though sin were an interesting guest likely to visit another household first. He speaks of order, obedience, charity, and judgment. These sermons often carry more than one message at a time. To the poor, be humble. To servants, be patient. To masters, be fair but firm. To all, remember eternity. The trouble begins when earthly fairness is left conveniently vague. For a black listener, scriptural stories may shine with uncomfortable relevance. Exodus, captivity, deliverance, the suffering of the innocent, the Lord hearing the cry of the oppressed. These are powerful currents in the Christian text. Yet ministers in colonial settings often steer carefully around their most dangerous implications. They are happy to preach spiritual freedom. Material freedom makes them nervous. It has a way of reaching into property arrangements. There is also the matter of instruction. Some black people are taught Christian doctrine by ministers or household members, especially if owners believe conversion will encourage discipline. Catechism questions are learned, prayers repeated, biblical stories memorized. The words can enter deeply, because faith does not become false simply because it was introduced through unequal power. Many people in history have found sincere belief under compromised conditions. Human souls are inconveniently difficult to control. At the same time, instruction can be selective. You may be told about obedience before you are told about justice, about patience before dignity, about heaven before fairness on earth. The colony has an excellent instinct for emphasizing whichever verses keep labor orderly. It is remarkable how often powerful people discover that God agrees with their staffing needs. A quirky detail of the 17th century is how much anxiety some colonists felt over whether Africans and their descendants should be fully incorporated into English Christian life at all. Not because the gospel lacked universal language, but because universal language creates obligations. Once a person is publicly your fellow Christian, certain old excuses become harder to repeat with a straight face. So some colonists hesitated, delayed, or adjusted religious practice to avoid disturbing the labour system. Nothing reveals moral panic quite like a planter developing advanced theological opinions on short notice. Baptism itself can be a beautiful ceremony. Cool water, a gathered community, a spoken name, a child held close, an adult standing still with a face that reveals little. In another world, it might simply mean belonging. In 1650, belonging is complicated by law, race, and profit. Even so, the moment can matter profoundly to the baptized person. To be named before God, to be recognized in a sacred setting, to hear words of blessing spoken over a body the world often treats as mere utility. That can leave a mark no statute fully erases. Scholars still debate how black converts in the early English colonies understood baptism in their own inner worlds. Because the records seldom preserve their voices directly, did some view it as spiritual refuge, as strategic protection, as entry into a community with real promises, as a language they could inhabit and reshape? Very likely all of these, depending on circumstance. Faith in colonial America was never a simple transfer from preacher to listener. It was heard, filtered, questioned, adapted, and carried into daily life in ways the archive only partly catches. The congregation itself offers a lesson in hierarchy. People do not always sit equally. Clothing reveals rank. A planter's family arrives in better fabric, cleaner collars, stronger shoes. Servants and labourers stand or sit where space permits. Black attendees may be included, tolerated, watched, or pushed to the margins depending on local custom. The sermon says one thing: The benches say another. Social order has a very expressive posture. After worship, conversation gathers outside in knots. The air smells brighter now, warmed by late morning sun, trampled grass, horse sweat, and pipe smoke curling upward. Men discuss crops, weather, prices, and local disputes with the same lips that just sang psalms. Women exchange household news, births, illness, and the quality of this week's flour. Children run until sharply reminded that Sabbath joy should not look too much like ordinary play. And somewhere in all this, the question of black Christian status continues to hover, unresolved in public even when many have privately chosen their side. Some masters encourage baptism because they believe a Christian labourer will be more obedient, sober, or stable. Others fear it may inspire claims to better treatment or freedom. A few may feel genuine religious concern. Human motives are rarely tidy. One owner may sponsor a baptism and still maintain harsh control. Another may avoid conversion talk altogether. A minister may sincerely wish to save souls but refuse to challenge the structure that degrades them. Moral compromise often wears the face of moderation. Women's religious life inside households matters too. Mistresses may oversee prayer, scripture reading, and basic religious instruction for children and servants. This gives domestic religion a distinctly gendered power. A woman with limited public authority can still shape spiritual routine inside the home. For black women labouring there, this may mean hearing scripture while scrubbing linen or tending a cradle, absorbing sacred language in fragments between tasks. Religion enters through doors left half open while work continues. Children again reveal the contradictions most clearly. A baptized black child is still not necessarily imagined as equal in earthly terms. The colony can bless a child's soul and still restrict the child's future with remarkable calm. Nothing exposes the distance between theology and practice like watching innocence processed through hierarchy. The font says, "Beloved." The ledger says, "Labour." By afternoon, Sabbath quiet settles more heavily over the settlement. Fewer tools strike wood. Fewer carts move. The wind carries bird song, distant voices, and the occasional impatient animal that does not appreciate holy schedules. You might sit outside after worship, feeling the warmth of the sun on your hands, the rough grain of a bench or fence beneath your fingertips, and the peculiar stillness that follows collective prayer. This can be one of the gentler hours of the week. It can also sharpen your awareness of contradiction, because rest makes thought louder. Perhaps you repeat a psalm line under your breath. Perhaps a gospel phrase lingers. Perhaps you consider whether the God described in church sees things more clearly than the people claiming to represent him. For many black people in this world, faith may become less about institutional consistency and more about divine witness. Humans lie, hedge, and classify. God sees. There is comfort in that idea, even when the earthly road remains hard. As evening comes, candles are lit again. Their small flames wobble in the moving air and throw soft shadows against the wall. The smell of tallow returns. Scripture may be read in the household once more. Knees bend in prayer, heads lower. Voices ask for blessing, safety, health, success in labour, and forgiveness for sins that will, by all signs, continue tomorrow. Colonial religion can be deeply sincere and deeply compromised at the same time. That is what makes it so difficult to dismiss and so difficult to trust. When night settles fully, one thing remains clear. Faith offers language for dignity, suffering, endurance, and hope. Baptism offers a sign of belonging that many people long for. Yet in 1650 for black Americans, neither faith nor baptism guarantees clear freedom in the colony. Water can mark the soul while leaving the body bound. The doubt does not live in God, perhaps, but in the society that hears sacred truth and immediately starts drafting exceptions. Evening is the hour when affection becomes possible, though never easy. The day's labour loosens its grip just enough for people to look at one another as more than moving parts. Smoke hangs low over the yard. Supper pots cool by degrees. Crickets begin their patient music, somewhere nearby. A baby gives that tired half cry, which means sleep is winning. The sky fades from gold to blue to something darker and softer, and in that brief change of light, faces seem gentler than they do at noon. You notice someone handing another person a cup before being asked, someone brushing straw from a sleeve, someone laughing in a way meant only for one listener. In a colony built on work, hierarchy, and suspicion, tenderness often appears in these small practical forms. Love does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives with shared bread, guarded eye contact, and the decision to save the warmer place by the fire for somebody else. For Black Americans in 1650, affection lives under supervision. Courtship, marriage, parenthood, and kinship all unfold in a world where ownership claims, legal uncertainty, and social prejudice can interrupt the most private hopes. You may form an attachment and still not know whether you can remain near that person next year. You may share a bed, a promise, and a child, yet possess no legal shield strong enough to keep a household together if labour demands shift. Love exists. The colony simply refuses to honour it reliably. This is what makes intimacy both precious and frightening. To care deeply for someone in such a place is to invite joy and risk in the same breath. A glance across the yard might sustain you all day. It might also become dangerous if the wrong person notices and decides your feelings are inconvenient. Colonial authority does not always need formal laws to interfere. Sometimes a lifted eyebrow from a master or mistress is enough to alter a life. The sounds of evening deepen the mood. Wooden bowls scrape. A low conversation rises and falls. An older woman hums while patching cloth. Somewhere out by the fence, frogs begin their wet chorus. The fire settles inward with occasional pops, sending out the smells of ash, stew, herbs, and smoke clinging to wool. The touch of the air changes too. After the day's heat, it brushes your neck coolly, almost kindly. Bodies sore from work shift closer to warmth, and closeness itself becomes part of the night's comfort. A mainstream historical truth stands behind all of this. Black families in the early English colonies did form bonds of partnership, parenthood, and household life. But those bonds were often precarious because colonial law and custom offered little consistent protection. Marriage might be recognized informally, spiritually, locally, or not at all. Children could be drawn into the status struggles of the colony. Separation by sale, transfer, or labour assignment remained a constant threat. Family existed, yet it existed on unstable ground. You may speak quietly with someone after supper, your words careful because privacy is scarce. The conversation does not have to be grand. A comment about weather, a complaint about blisters, a joke about the master's terrible horse sense, a question about whether the moon will bring better fishing tides. In a tightly controlled world, ordinary conversation can become intimate precisely because so much of life is watched. The simple choice to share your unguarded voice with another person matters. Touch matters too, perhaps even more. A hand passing a cup and lingering for half a second, fingers helping tie a kerchief, a shoulder leaning briefly against yours while no one is looking, a child climbing into a parent's lap after dusk and falling asleep against a chest that smells of smoke and work. These are not trivial moments. They build a private world inside a hostile public one. The colony often refuses to see black love as fully human, which is one reason it can interfere so casually. English authorities and household heads may tolerate attachments when convenient, ignore them when they are not, or exploit them for leverage. A stable couple may be kept together because their labour arrangement suits the owner. Another may be separated because one person is needed elsewhere. Feeling does not control policy, utility does. Marriage itself sits in uncertain territory. Christian marriage has weight in English culture, but black unions do not always receive equal recognition in colonial practice. A minister may bless a bond, a household may acknowledge it, neighbours may respect it, yet if legal and economic power refuse to honour it consistently, that recognition remains fragile. The vows may be real. The protection may not be. There is a deep cruelty in granting people a language of commitment without the security that commitment ought to bring. Children sharpen every joy and every fear. A child's laughter in the yard can feel like sunlight even on a hard day. A child learning words, balancing on unsteady legs, reaching out small hands covered in dust or flour or ash. These moments are ordinary in the best possible way. Yet in 1650, black children grow up within legal uncertainty that can shape their futures before they can understand it. Parents and kin look at a sleeping child and see tenderness. The colony may see labour, status and claim. That knowledge changes the tone of care. You hold a child and also carry anxiety. You sing softly and also calculate. Who controls this child's future? What rule might be applied? Which household mood will matter most? Safety, in such a world, is not a fixed condition. It is a series of temporary arrangements maintained by vigilance, reputation, negotiation, and luck. Luck, sadly, is not known for its fairness. A curious little detail from early colonial records is that family relationships sometimes surface only indirectly, through disputes over property, baptism, inheritance, or household composition. A man appears beside a woman in repeated entries. A child's name echoes a parent's. A burial mention hints at a spouse. Historians piece together lives from these scraps like listeners straining to hear a song through a wall. The archive rarely says, "Here is love." It says, "Here are people near one another long enough that feeling becomes probable." The silence is frustrating, but the patterns are still there. Scholars continue to debate how stable early black family structures were in different English colonies, especially before later slave codes fixed hereditary bondage more firmly. Some evidence suggests households that persisted across years, with kin networks forming around baptism, work arrangements, and neighbourhood ties. Other evidence points to frequent separation and deep instability. The truth likely varied by region, owner, and local custom. Variability, however, is not the same as safety. It simply means fate changed from place to place. Women often carried the emotional architecture of family life while also bearing exhausting physical labour. Black women cooked, cleaned, worked fields, tended children, cared for the sick, and tried to preserve dignity under close watch. They may have been partners, mothers, sisters, aunts, godmothers, healers, and quiet keepers of memory all at once. The colony made these roles harder, not less necessary. A home can be fragile and still require enormous strength to hold together. Men, too, faced particular strains. A black man might be expected to protect family without possessing legal power to guarantee that protection. He might labour near his loved ones or at a distance. He might be judged through stereotypes of strength, while carrying the daily emotional burden of uncertainty. A father may teach a child practical tasks, a song fragment, a warning about authority, and the art of reading danger in a room. These lessons are forms of care, even when spoken without tenderness in the voice. Kinship extends beyond narrow definitions in this world. Aunties may not be official aunts. Uncles may be older men who guide rather than men tied by blood. Children may be watched by several adults. A person newly arrived may be folded into support networks through language, worship, labour proximity, or shared hardship. Colonial documents like tidy categories, but human communities are much more inventive. When law refuses to secure family, people build wider circles of belonging. Night gives a little more room for these circles to breathe. After work, stories surface. They may be humorous, cautionary, devotional, or half-remembered from another coast. Someone describes an animal so absurdly clever that everyone suspects exaggeration. Someone else insists the story is perfectly true, which only makes it funnier. Laughter under pressure sounds different from easy laughter. It is lower, quicker, almost surprised by itself, but it still warms the chest. Food can become part of love as well. The extra spoonful, the saved crust, the herb added for someone with a cough, the carefully cooled broth for a child. In a world without abundance, care often speaks through rationing. You know who matters to whom by what gets set aside and by whose bowl is checked first. Affection leaves traces in the kitchen long before it reaches poetry. Yet watchful eyes are never far. A mistress may notice closeness and disapprove if she fears distraction or divided loyalties. A master may resent attachments that make labourers less movable. Other workers, desperate in their own way, may avoid drawing attention by keeping distance from anyone too visibly cherished. Even jealousy has to be managed carefully in such a place. Private feelings are constantly negotiating with public danger. There is also desire, which is, of course, the part of human life that history often makes stiff and bloodless unless invited to admit otherwise. Attraction flickers in posture, voice, and timing. A person smooths their hair before carrying water. Someone chooses the longer route to pass near another door. Someone lingers by the fire after others have settled. None of this needs to be explicit to be real. In fact, in a sleepier history, it is often stronger when left in the hush between gestures. A shared sleeping space can hold many realities: exhaustion, comfort, fear, familiar breathing in the dark, the warmth of another body on a cold night, a whispered plan, a prayer for a child, a silence full of things too heavy for speech. Sleep itself becomes less lonely when another person turns over beside you. That ordinary comfort should not be underestimated. In hard times, simple companionship can feel almost miraculous. By late night, the yard grows still except for insects, distant animal sounds, and the occasional murmur from those not yet asleep. Moonlight lays pale shapes across the ground. The air smells of cooling earth and banked embers. You lie near the people who matter to you or wish you could. In 1650 for black Americans, love is rarely protected by the colony, but it persists anyway. It persists in shared work, shared hunger, shared laughter, shared memory, and the stubborn decision to care for one another where no clear freedom exists. The watchful eyes remain, so does the heart. Freedom in 1650 rarely arrives with fanfare. No trumpets, no elegant document presented under a bright sky while respectable witnesses nod approvingly. More often, it appears as a rumour first. Someone says a man completed his term and now works for wages. Someone says a woman in a nearby county holds property in her own name. Someone says a black labourer petitioned a court and won recognition of an earlier agreement. The story travels along roads, through kitchens, across river landings, and into fields where tired people weigh hope carefully, as though it might break if handled too boldly. You hear such stories and feel something tighten in your chest. Not quite joy, because joy would be too reckless. Not disbelief either, because the colonies are inconsistent enough for almost anything to happen somewhere. It is more like a cautious rising, a sense that the wall has a crack. Even if no one can promise it leads outside, fragile freedom is exactly that. A crack, not a doorway. The day begins in a county seat or town edge where legal business, trade, and gossip meet in the same muddy lanes. Morning smells of horse sweat, damp leather, wood smoke, and river mist lifting slowly into pale sunlight. Men lead carts past storehouses. Women balance baskets or guide children by the hand. A clerk opens shutters in a room where paper already waits in little stacks like sleeping trouble. Somewhere a smith begins work, the hammer ringing sharply enough to make the whole street feel awake. In such places, freedom can seem almost transactional, as though it might be reached with the correct words, the right witness, and a little luck. For some black Americans, paths toward liberty did exist in the mid-17th century. A completed term of service might be honoured, a contract might be recognised, baptism, military service, skilled labour, or close ties within a household might improve one's chances in specific cases. A person might acquire tools, livestock, clothing, or modest land. There were black men and women in the English colonies who gained legal freedom and carved out lives that, though insecure, were not wholly controlled by another person. These stories are real. Their rarity is real too. This is the important balance. Freedom is possible enough to be visible, but unstable enough to remain frightening. The colony has not fully locked every gate, yet many gates swing shut without warning. To be free in law does not mean free from surveillance, prejudice, debt, hunger, or the danger of being pushed back into dependency. A status gained on paper can feel thin in a world where white authority still controls courts, markets, and reputation. A mainstream historical fact supports this uneasy picture. In the early English colonies, some black individuals did secure freedom, own property, marry, and participate in local economic life before later decades hardened racial slavery more comprehensively. Yet even these free black lives remained vulnerable within a legal and social order, moving steadily towards stricter racial hierarchy. Freedom existed, but it was often conditional, contested, and precarious. One path toward fragile freedom runs through service terms. If you entered a colony under an arrangement understood as indenture, and if that arrangement was acknowledged, completion of the term could bring release. The if is doing enormous work in that sentence. A term must be recognised. Records must survive. Witnesses must be willing. The person with power must not simply decide otherwise. Still, where agreements were honoured, a person might emerge with clothes, tool, corn, or some small provision intended to begin independent life. Beginning independent life with a hoe and a nervous goat is not exactly luxury, but history is full of humbler beginnings. Another path runs through skilled labour. Colonial settlements need carpenters, coopers, boatmen, herdsmen, cooks, laundresses, seamstresses, midwives, and people who understand land and weather better than official leaders do. Skill can create bargaining power. A master may hesitate to lose a worker who knows how to mend a barrel properly, navigate a creek at night, brew for a household, or cure illness with practical knowledge. In some cases, highly valued labour opened room for wages, side earnings, special permissions, or eventual manumission. Skill does not defeat hierarchy, but it can complicate it. You see this in the market. The market is a school of worth, though not always justice. Stalls creak under baskets, hides, tools, fish, roots, herbs, and cloth. The smell is wonderfully mixed and not entirely civilized. Onion, smoke, salt fish, apples if they are in season, horse droppings because history likes realism, mud churned by many boots. A free black person moving through this space with goods to sell inhabits a very particular kind of visibility. They are proof that the category exists. They are also a reminder that every eye may be measuring whether that existence will be tolerated. Property matters, perhaps not because it grants complete independence, but because it creates leverage. A pig, a cow, a few chickens, a gun for hunting where permitted, tools, a cooking pot, a chest, a patch of cleared land. These things anchor a life. They turn labour into household survival rather than someone else's direct profit. For free black colonists, possession could mean stability, reputation, and a foothold in the world. It could also invite resentment from neighbours who believed whiteness should command every rung of local society. A curious detail from this era is that some free black people appear in records as heads of households, taxpayers, landholders, or litigants, in ways that can surprise readers accustomed to the more rigid slave societies of later centuries. These moments feel startling because they reveal just how unfinished the colonial order still was, yet that very surprise should be handled carefully. Such cases do not show a fair society. They show a society in transition, where certain outcomes had not yet been fully strangled. The legal route to freedom often depends on memory and paperwork meeting at exactly the right moment. A witness recalls the terms of service, a note surfaces, a prior owner's statement is cited, a court, for reasons of local custom or evidence, rules in favour of release. Imagine the texture of that moment. Your palms damp, the room stuffy with old air, ink drying on a page, men speaking as if calm procedure can contain the fact that your whole future is hanging on their phrasing. When the decision goes your way, relief probably arrives mixed with disbelief. Freedom can feel unreal at first when so much of life has trained you to expect reversal, and reversal remains possible. That is why fragile freedom has such a specific emotional flavour. A free black man may work his own small plot and still face harassment over boundaries, labour obligations, or debts. A free black woman may maintain a household and still depend on the goodwill of neighbours, patrons, or local officials to protect what little she has. A person who has secured legal release may still be vulnerable to kidnapping, fraudulent claims, or pressure that pushes them into new forms of dependency. Freedom on paper can shiver in a high wind. Scholars still debate how numerous and how stable free black communities were in different parts of the English colonial world, before the late 17th century transformed the legal landscape more fully. Some areas offered more room for free black households to develop, especially where labour systems remained fluid and local practice varied. Other areas squeezed that room quickly. What seems clear is that free black life was neither imaginary nor secure. It lived in a narrow band between possibility and hostility. Religion could play a role here too, though not a reliable one. A baptized black Christian might find some local support from ministers or fellow worshippers who saw spiritual kinship as carrying social duties. In a few cases, church affiliation or Christian reputation may have strengthened a freedom claim or helped secure standing. Yet religion could also fail completely when confronted with economic interest. Colonial conscience had a curious habit of retreating when property was discussed too closely. Marriage and family change under freedom, but do not become simple. A free person can hope to build a household with more control over daily labour, sleeping space, food, and chilled rearing. That matters immensely. To decide where to place your own pot, when to bank your own fire, how to direct your own evening. These are quiet freedoms, but they shape the soul. And yet the wider colony still presses in. Neighbours judge, courts hover, white households retain power over employment and movement. Freedom gives more room to breathe. It does not clear the air entirely. The sensory world of a free household, even a poor one, would have its own dignity. A yard swept because you chose to sweep it. A pot of stew made from your own beans, your own greens, perhaps a bit of pork if fortune smiled. The smell of your wood smoke rising from your hearth. The feel of a door you can close as a keeper rather than a subordinate. A sleeping child under a blanket earned through your own labour. The touch of ownership in daily objects is not glamorous, but it is profound. There are also wages, though wages in the colony seldom feel generous. Still, coin or tobacco payment in your own hand changes the texture of work. It lets you barter, save, repay, buy cloth, acquire seed, repair a roof, purchase a piglet, secure a kettle, pay fees, or present yourself in public as someone negotiating rather than merely obeying. Money is never the whole meaning of freedom, but in a colonial world where almost everything is uncertain, it can serve as a hard little proof that your labour is momentarily your own. Not everyone seeks freedom through the same strategy. Some petition courts, some cultivate indispensable skill, some rely on kin ties, patronage, or local reputation. Some navigate multiple households over years, building enough trust or leverage to secure release. Some simply survive long enough for a particular opportunity to open. History often flatters itself by looking for one grand road to liberty. The truth is messier. Freedom, where it appeared, was often reached through a combination of endurance, adaptation, courage, and chance. By late afternoon, the market thins. The mud is more churned, the air warmer and dustier, the voices lower. Sunlight glances off the river in broken gold. A free black labourer or householder walking home with tools over one shoulder or goods in a basket moves through this light with a certain kind of measured pride. Not swagger. Swagger would be risky, but a grounded step, a sense that one small piece of the day belonged to them and was not borrowed. Evening settles over a modest dwelling. The door closes, the fire is stirred. Supper smells stronger now, maybe cornbread, greens, fish, or beans. A child recites a word learned that day. A garment is mended by candlelight. A neighbour may stop by. News is exchanged carefully. Every object in the room has been fought for in one way or another. The cup, the stool, the blanket, the iron pot, the patch of earth outside. This is not abundance. It is earned space and still. Beneath the quiet, the fragility remains. A debt, a quarrel, a hostile official, a legal shift, a planter with influence. The colony is moving toward harsher lines, and anyone paying attention can feel it. Yet for this moment, freedom exists in real acts, in choosing where to stand, in deciding what to plant, in speaking to your child without permission, in sleeping under your own roof, however slight. In 1650 for black Americans, liberty can be reached sometimes, held briefly, and cherished intensely, all while never feeling entirely safe. That is what makes it precious. That is what makes it fragile. Punishment in the colonies rarely announces itself with philosophy. It arrives as a shout across a yard, a summons to court, a tightened jaw from an overseer, a public accusation, a missing ration, an extra day added, a body tied to a post, a rumour spreading faster than smoke. By the time anyone explains the lesson has already been felt. That is how authority likes to work in 1650. Not always through elegant law, but through immediate correction, witnessed by enough people to leave a mark on memory. The day begins with unease. You can feel it before you know its cause. Maybe a labourer is missing at first count. Maybe tools were misplaced. Maybe tobacco bundles came out wrong. Maybe someone answered too sharply. Maybe a servant slipped away and was caught. Colonial settlements are small enough that trouble travels quickly, and large enough that it can acquire details while moving. By dawn, whispers move through quarters, kitchens, and fields. Something has happened. Someone will be made into an example. This is one of the grimmest truths of the period. Even before slave codes are fully hardened, punishment is already helping shape a racial order. Every whipping, court ruling, forced extension of service, or public humiliation teaches the colony what kinds of discipline it will tolerate, and upon whom it will impose the harshest terms. Punishment is not only response, it is rehearsal. Each act helps create the future. A mainstream historical fact stands at the centre here. In the mid-17th century English colonies, legal cases and everyday punishments increasingly treated black people more harshly, helping establish precedents that later solidified into racial slavery. The shift was not always immediate or uniform, but the pattern is clear. Blackness became more closely linked to permanent unfreedom and severe discipline, while white servitude remained more likely to be imagined as temporary. The atmosphere around punishment is sensory and social at once. The yard smells of trampled dirt, sweat already rising from bodies not yet an hour into work, and last night's ash stirred by morning wind. Boots grind gravel. A horse flicks its tail impatiently. Someone coughs and then goes silent because silence feels safer. There may be a post, a fence rail, a courthouse bench, or merely open ground where people are told to gather. Nothing in the setting is ceremonial, yet the moment still has ritual power. People are being taught where the limits lie. A person accused of running away often becomes the centre of these lessons. Flight is terrifying to owners not only because labour is lost, but because escape mocks the whole structure of command. If one person can leave, then the system is not natural after all. It must therefore answer with force. White servants who run may have extra years added. Black labourers may face harsher physical punishment, stronger assumptions of lifelong bondage, or treatment that implies escape itself proves a more dangerous nature. The colony loves to pretend that the punishment reveals character, when in truth it reveals the colony. Inside a courthouse or local meeting room, punishment can wear cleaner clothes. A clerk writes a sentence. A magistrate nods. A witness offers a statement. The room smells of paper, damp wood, pipe smoke, and the odd seriousness of provincial men who enjoy sounding definitive. Years are added, claims are denied, terms are clarified in the most convenient direction. What looks like procedure may simply be prejudice learning to write neatly. One reason precedent matters so much is that these colonies are still improvising. A single ruling can ripple outward because local officials, planters, and neighbours remember it. They repeat it, they cite it, they reshape custom around it. If a black labourer is judged more harshly than a white servant in a comparable dispute, the difference becomes thinkable, then familiar, then normal. That is how unequal law often grows. It does not begin with everyone agreeing. It begins with enough people shrugging. You can hear that shrug in conversation. At a work break, someone says the punishment was severe but necessary. Another says black workers must be kept in order more firmly. A third repeats what he heard in court and adds a little confidence, where there was originally only local opinion. Human beings are alarmingly efficient at converting yesterday's cruelty into today's common sense. Punishment is not always physical, though physical pain certainly plays its part. A person can be denied food, sleep, movement, wages, or the promised end of service. A parent can be threatened with separation from a child. A worker can be shifted from relatively skilled labour to harsher field work. A household servant can be cast out to rougher conditions. A small act of dignity can be stripped away deliberately. Colonial discipline is inventive because power has time on its hands and little shame. A curious detail from the broader 17th century record is how often punishments combine moral language with economic purpose. A magistrate may speak of disorder, insolence, or correction, while the practical effect is to secure more labour and stronger control. The language sounds righteous. The outcome sounds profitable. This pairing is one of the colony's signature habits. It can moralise almost anything, provided ownership benefits. For black women, punishment carries additional layers. A woman may be disciplined for labour issues, for speech judged impertinent, for sexual accusations whether coerced or not, for pregnancy, or for household tensions impossible to manage perfectly. Colonial society expects service and self-control while providing little protection from exploitation. The standards are sharp, the mercy thin. A woman can be blamed for disorder produced by the very people claiming authority over her. Children watch all of this. That may be the most haunting part. A child sees a body struck, a person tied, a worker publicly rebuked, a mother silenced, a father threatened, a court decision discussed in grave tones. Children learn not only what adults say, but what adults enforce. White children absorb rank, black children absorb caution. The colony is educating both at once. Scholars continue to debate how much everyday punishment in this period followed clear legal logic, and how much depended on local custom, personal temperament, and improvisation. In truth, the distinction may not comfort anyone living through it. Arbitrary discipline can be even more frightening than codified discipline because prediction becomes difficult. You cannot prepare cleanly for a rule that changes with mood. Yet over time, even arbitrariness can harden into pattern. When black people are repeatedly punished more harshly, the improvisation begins to look like a system because that is exactly what it is becoming. The physical experience of public punishment leaves deep impressions on everyone present. Sun on the back of your neck while you're forced to watch, dust sticking to damp skin, the sound of leather moving through air, or the crack of a rod, or simply the sharp voice of a magistrate saying enough to make the room colder, the victim's breathing, the crowd's silence, someone looking away and then quickly back. It does not require gore to understand the purpose. The point is, obedience made visible. Afterward, work resumes with eerie speed. That may be one of history's cruelest deficiencies. A person is punished, an example is set, and then people return to the field, kitchen, dock, or shop because tobacco still needs tending and bread still needs baking. The day does not pause out of respect. The colony absorbs the event into routine, which only deepens its power. Pain becomes part of administration. Not all punishment is immediate. Sometimes it waits in the form of legal memory. A black labourer's act of resistance, however small, may be recalled later as evidence of untrustworthiness. A dispute enters the record. A reputation forms. A local official learns a name. Future judgments then arrive in an atmosphere already tilted against the person. Precedent is not only what courts decide, it is what communities remember selectively. There are nights when punishment echoes more loudly than the act itself. People lie awake on straw or rough pallets, hearing insects outside, a low wind against the boards, someone nearby turning restlessly. The smell of smoke has settled into everything. No one speaks much. The body of the punished person may still tremble. The minds of the watchers certainly do. Silence after discipline is never empty. It is full of calculations. Who is safe? What counts as too much speech? Whether a promise can be trusted? Whether a witness would help or hide? Fear is busy work. Taverns and crossroads spread these lessons farther. By evening, men who were not present may be discussing the punishment over ale, tobacco, and the usual colonial confidence. They repeat the facts badly, but they preserve the principle. Black labour must be tightly controlled. Servants who resist will be extended. Courts are leaning in a certain direction. A severe example was made and order restored. That phrase, order restored, covers an impressive amount of cruelty in human history. You begin to see that punishment serves as a bridge between uncertain categories and firmer oppression. When the law is not yet fully settled, discipline helps settle it emotionally. People become accustomed to harsher treatment of black bodies. They witness it, explain it, justify it, and then build rules around what they have already accepted in practice. By the time the statutes grow more explicit, much of the social training is already complete. There is also a terrible economy of spectacle involved. Punishment costs time, but it is meant to save labour losses later. A planter who terrifies 10 workers by punishing one believes he has managed his estate wisely. A court that makes one severe ruling expects smoother obedience afterward. Colonial governance is often crude, but it is rarely innocent. It understands demonstration. By late afternoon, the yard empties. The post stands quiet. Dust settles. Chickens return to peck near places where human fear recently gathered. The ordinary world resumes with insulting normality. Supper smoke rises. Tools are put away. Children are called in. The sky takes on that soft evening colour which would be peaceful in another story. Yet the lesson remains in the air. People move differently after a public correction. Shoulders lower, voices thin, eyes stay alert. When darkness comes, punishment keeps working long after the shouting stops. It enters dreams, choices, and the unwritten knowledge passed quietly from one person to another. In 1650, for black Americans, each punishment is more than an isolated cruelty. It is one more stroke in the making of a racial order, one more precedent teaching the colony who may be controlled most brutally and who is expected to watch, learn, and endure. The law is still forming, but the fear is already fluent. The air changes before the law fully does. That is how a society hardens, not with one dramatic trumpet blast, but with a tightening in ordinary life, a tone in the yard, a phrase in a ledger, a judge's confidence where uncertainty once lived, a planter's habit of speaking less about service and more about ownership. By the later years of the 17th century approaching from the distance, the colony is becoming surer of its cruelty. You can feel the edges sharpening. In 1650 there is still blur in the system, still argument, still occasional openings, still local variation wide enough to create strange outcomes. Yet the direction is becoming easier to read. Blackness is being tied more firmly to permanent bondage. Freedom, where it appears, is treated less as a possibility and more as an exception requiring explanation. The colony is moving away from ambiguity, not toward justice, but toward efficiency. Men with land dislike uncertain labour systems. They prefer durable answers, especially when those answers make them richer. Morning begins on a road between field and river, where carts leave deep tracks in soft ground and mist hangs low over the marsh grass. The smell is cool and earthy, with wet leaves, horse breath, and wood smoke drifting from a distant chimney. A bird calls once and then again. Wheels groan. Someone slaps mud from a boot. Life looks ordinary enough. That is the unnerving part. Great historical changes often pass through places that appear almost sleepy. You walk through a colony where custom is settling into expectation. White servants still labour hard, but their future is increasingly imagined as one that can end in land, wages, trade, or at least formal release. Black labour, by contrast, is being imagined as enduring. Children notice it, merchants notice it, clerks notice it. Ministers explain around it, masters rely on it. What began as confusion is stiffening into principle. That principle is race. A mainstream historical fact shapes this final turn. In the later 17th century, English colonies such as Virginia and Maryland increasingly codified hereditary racial slavery through laws that linked status more clearly to African descent and to maternal condition. These legal developments did not appear from nowhere. They built upon decades of local practice, court decisions, labour demand, and social prejudice already present by 1650. The future system is visible in outline, even if some of its sharpest statutes have not yet landed. What does that feel like from inside a life? It feels like doors quietly growing heavier, like hearing fewer stories of successful release, like watching a black child and understanding that the colony now looks at the child with a more settled appetite, like sensing that Christian language no longer unsettles owners as much because they are learning how to separate soul from status with practiced ease. It feels like possibility shrinking not all at once, but enough each year to notice. You see this in record-keeping, that the clerk's hand becomes more certain. Descriptions grow more categorical. Terms that once carried some looseness begin to harden. Negro becomes not only a descriptor but a social position. Slave becomes less a contested outcome, and more an assumed one in growing parts of the system. Paper has always been dangerous, but now it grows confident. Confident paper can do enormous harm. The colony also changes in its physical ambition. Houses improve, storehouses rise, fields spread farther, roads are cut more clearly, river landings become busier, trade strengthens, wealth thickens in certain hands, and as wealth grows, so does the desire to secure the labour beneath it. Prosperity in such a place is never innocent. The more successful tobacco becomes, the more urgently planters seek a workforce that can be controlled across generations. Convenience matures into policy. You feel the shift in speech. A master who once referred vaguely to years of service now speaks of lifelong possession with less embarrassment. A neighbour who once debated a black labourer's status now shrugs as though the matter is obvious. White workers, poor and overburdened, may begin to cling more tightly to their racial distinction because it offers status where wealth does not. That is one of history's nastier bargains. Give struggling people someone below them, and many will defend the ladder that crushes them too. A curious detail of colonial transformation is how quickly yesterday's improvisation can become tomorrow's tradition. Ask people why things are arranged as they are, and before long they will say this is how it has always been done. Always. Human beings love that word. It lets fresh injustice borrow the authority of age. A policy 20 years old can be described as ancient wisdom if enough people benefit from forgetting its recent birth. Households reflect the hardening as clearly as courts. Children raised in these later decades learn racial hierarchy earlier and more confidently. They no longer encounter as much uncertainty around black status. A black servant or enslaved person in the home is more likely to be treated as fixed within the family economy, not temporary or negotiable. The mistress commands with settled expectation. The master invests with inherited assumptions. Even kindness, where it appears, is often the kindness one extends toward a person one never intends to see as an equal. Fields change too, not only in labour demands but in social meaning. A row of workers no longer represents a mixed uncertainty in quite the same way. Racial sorting grows stronger. The association between black skin and unfree labour becomes more visible to everyone watching. The landscape itself starts teaching race. Children walking by a field absorb the lesson without needing a sermon. The eye becomes trained by repetition. Scholars still debate how ordinary colonists understood this transformation as it unfolded. Did they recognize themselves as building a new racial order? Or did many simply experience a series of practical changes that, taken together, produced that order? Likely both. Elites could be strategic. Others could be thoughtless participants. But thoughtlessness does not soften the outcome. A system can be made by grand design and daily laziness at the same time. Religion adjusts with remarkable flexibility. Once baptism raised awkward questions, now legal clarifications and social habits increasingly strip those questions of practical force. A black Christian can remain fully bound in the eyes of the colony without disturbing local confidence. The contradiction does not vanish. It simply becomes familiar. Familiar contradiction is one of the strongest materials in political life. Once people get used to moral absurdity, they can live inside it very comfortably. Families feel the pressure most painfully. A black mother looks at her child and sees a future being written with heavier ink. A father measures his labour against a system that plans to outlast him. Love remains. Care remains. Story, discipline, humour, worship, and tenderness remain. But the horizon narrows. The colony is no longer merely improvising around black life. It is increasingly organising itself to contain it from birth. The marketplace reveals this hardening in practical ways. Buyers ask different questions. Sellers use firmer language. Values are attached to bodies with less hesitation. Free black people, where they exist, stand out more sharply as anomalies in a society arranging itself around hereditary bondage. Their property, mobility, and reputation may provoke growing suspicion. A free black household becomes not just a local fact but a challenge to the neatness of the emerging order. Neatness, sadly, is a vice colonies often mistake for virtue. The sounds of the later century gather around you even before the formal statutes fully arrive. More hammers, more wagons, more church bells, more voices discussing shipping, acreage, inheritance, and discipline. Expansion creates noise, yet within that growing colonial bustle, black freedom becomes quieter, less discussed, less assumed. Silence can be political too. A society sometimes hardens simply by speaking less often of alternatives. There are still people who resist the direction. A minister may worry privately, a judge may hesitate, a neighbour may remember older customs, a contract may still be honoured here and there, a free black person may still buy land, raise children, defend a claim, worship publicly, and hold together a life of dignity. Such realities matter because they prevent the story from flattening into inevitability. Nothing is automatic while human beings are still making choices. Yet the balance of power is shifting hard enough that exceptions no longer feel like signs of openness. They feel like survivors in narrowing water. By late afternoon, sunlight pours low across a wide field and turns tobacco leaves into dull bronze. The smell is dry, bitter, and faintly sweet. Workers move more slowly. Dusk clings to ankles, far off. The river flashes silver. It is a beautiful scene in the irritating way history often is. Beauty never asks permission before appearing in cruel systems. The land glows as though nothing is wrong. Men who profit from bondage love such evenings. They look over their acreage and call it order. You know better. Order for whom? Peace for whom? Security for whom? The answers are becoming clearer every year. The colony is deciding more openly now that black labour should be durable, inheritable, and closely policed. That decision will shape births, marriages, punishments, worship, movement, and memory. It will settle into architecture, agriculture, law, and language. It will teach even those who do not own slaves how to think about race. That is how vast systems spread. They make bystanders into participants. Night falls over the settlement with its familiar smells of smoke, damp earth, animal heat, and cooling food. Doors close, fires lower. Somewhere a child whimpers in sleep and is soothed. Somewhere a man sits outside a little longer than necessary because the dark offers one final space not fully claimed by the day. The stars come out as they always do, impartial and cold. Under them, the colony's new confidence looks both powerful and terribly fragile, because all such systems depend on constant enforcement. Yet fragile systems can still last a very long time when backed by law and profit, and so the uncertainty of 1650 does not disappear into fairness. It hardens into a structure. The old blur around freedom and bondage does not remain open. It becomes a tool for selecting which people will be allowed full futures, and which will be folded into inherited labour. For black Americans, that hardening means a world where survival still requires ingenuity, community, faith, and endurance, but where the chances of recognised liberty grow slimmer as the generations turn. The colony has made its choice. It will now spend many years pretending that choice was nature. Now the night deepens, and the edges of the settlement soften. The roofs lose their sharp lines. The yard fades into shadow. The road becomes a pale ribbon under moonlight, quiet at last after the day's wheels and hooves. The smoke from the chimneys thins into the dark, and the smell of ash settles low over the ground. You can almost imagine the colony sleeping peacefully, though history knows better. Even in stillness, the place is busy shaping lives. Let your breathing slow here. Feel the cool air drift through the trees and across the open fields. Hear the insects keeping their patient rhythm, one steady note after another. A distant animal stirs, then settles again. Somewhere, Embers glow softly beneath a layer of ash, holding their heat in silence. The world seems gentler at this hour, not because it has become just, but because night places a blanket over its roughest details. You are left with the human things that endure longest. The warmth of a hand briefly held, the murmur of a prayer spoken low, the smell of bread or broth at the end of labour, the memory of a true name, the sound of laughter rising unexpectedly from tired people who still find room for it. These are small lights, but small lights matter in dark centuries. The colony may harden, laws may stiffen, words on paper may grow colder, yet the inward life of ordinary people keeps moving beneath all that pressure. Like water under winter ground, memory continues, care continues, hope, even when narrowed, continues in quiet forms, a blanket tucked around a sleeping child, a story repeated so it will not vanish, a fire kept alive until morning. So let the settlement fade now into darkness. Let the road disappear. Let the voices soften until they are only murmurs carried by the wind. Let the stars hang overhead, distant and still, and let the long day, with all its uncertainty and sorrow, drift farther away as the night grows calm, the air cool, and the world at last becomes hushed enough for sleep.